Have you ever stood inside an old building and felt the weight of what it refuses to tell you? I'm not talking about ghost stories. I'm talking about the architecture of silence. The way a structure can be designed, deliberately, methodically, to keep something hidden, not from armies or thieves, but from time itself. There's a church along the Mississippi River, built in 1857, just 4 years before the war that would tear the country in half. Presbyterian, white-clappered, modest in most respects except for one feature, a steeple that rose 60 feet above the floodplain, visible for miles in either direction. The kind of landmark riverboat pilots would have used to orient themselves in fog. In September of 1943, a tornado came through that part of northern Louisiana. Not unusual for the season. What was unusual was what the storm revealed when it tore into that steeple. The congregation examined what the wind had exposed. They documented their findings in the church records. Then they made a decision that has held for 81 years. They sealed it back up. The pages in the church record book that describe what they found? Someone removed them, carefully, deliberately, left blank sheets where the inspection report should have been. The steeple has remained sealed ever since. The current property owner, a descendant of the original congregation, knows what's inside. His grandfather told him, but he won't say. When pressed, he'll only offer this: there are things in there that the family doesn't want known, things that might cause problems if revealed. 81 years. That's how long something has been deliberately concealed inside a church steeple on the Mississippi River. And the people who know what it is have decided you never will. The church was built in 1857 by a small Presbyterian congregation in what was then a strategic position along the Mississippi River, straddling the border between northern Louisiana and southern Mississippi. According to architectural surveys preserved in the Methodist Historical Society archives in Jackson, Mississippi, the building followed a simple vernacular design common to rural southern churches of the period, except for the steeple. The construction plans, filed with the parish in 1857 and discovered by local historian Dr. Ellen Fairchild in 2018, describe the campanario, the bell tower, in unusual detail. Most church plans from this era simply note bell tower or steeple without elaboration. These plans specify an internal cavity, a reinforced chamber, and a sealed compartment within the tower structure. The purpose of this compartment is never stated in the surviving documentation. Dr. Fairchild, who specializes in pre-Civil War ecclesiastical architecture, noted in her 2019 research article for the Journal of Southern Religious History that this level of structural specification was highly irregular for a rural congregation of modest means. She wrote, "One must ask why a congregation would invest resources in a hidden chamber whose function went undocumented in their own building plans." The church sat approximately 200 yards from the river, elevated on a natural rise that provided clear sightlines in all directions. The land around it in 1857 was mostly cleared, cotton fields to the east, dense bottomland hardwoods to the west. The congregation numbered about 40 families, according to membership rolls preserved in the denomination archives. Most were farmers. A few operated small merchant operations serving riverboat traffic. Their names appear throughout parish records of the period: Greer, Hargrave, Denton, Coldwell. Ordinary people living ordinary lives in the last years before everything changed. When the war came in 1861, the church's strategic position made it valuable in ways the congregation likely never anticipated. Union forces controlled the Mississippi River after the fall of Vicksburg in July 1863, and the stretch of river where the church stood became a corridor for supply movements and troop transfers. Confederate guerrilla activity in the area meant the river wasn't entirely safe, and shore installations like the church became temporary military facilities. According to quartermaster records from the 31st Illinois Infantry, housed in the National Archives, The church served as a supply depot for at least 3 months in late 1863. A medical officer's report from December 1863, cited in The Medical and Surgical History of the War of the Rebellion, describes the church as a temporary hospital for treatment of fever cases, well situated for ventilation and access to clean water. The church building survived the war intact. This itself was somewhat remarkable. Many rural churches in contested areas were destroyed, either deliberately or as collateral damage. But this one stood. When the congregation resumed regular services in 1865, they found the building structurally sound, though in need of repairs to address wear from military occupation. The post-war period left limited documentation. Church records from 1865 through the 1880s are sparse: baptisms, marriages, deaths, occasional notations of repairs. But in the 1890s, something shifts in the record-keeping. The church minutes from 1893 mention major renovations to address structural concerns. An entry from 1897 notes campanario reinforcement completed. Another from 1902 describes maintenance of sealed compartment per original design specifications. Dr. Fairchild found these references telling. Why, she asks in her research notes, would a congregation 35 years after the war invest in reinforcing a bell tower that showed no signs of structural failure? And what did maintenance of sealed compartment entail if the compartment was indeed sealed? The church continued operating through the early 20th century. Membership fluctuated. Some families left for opportunities in cities. New families arrived. The building itself settled into the landscape, became a landmark. People in the area referred to it simply as the Old River Church. Quote, by the 1920s, the structure showed its age: peeling paint, weathered boards, a slight list to the foundation on the south side. But it still functioned. Services every Sunday, weddings, funerals, the rhythms of a community marking time. In the 1930s, during the Depression, attendance declined. The minutes from that period are brief and businesslike: motions to defer repairs, discussions of how to pay the minister, votes on whether to combine services with a neighboring congregation to save resources. The campanario is mentioned only once, in a 1936 entry. Access to tower restricted pending funds for a comprehensive inspection. By 1940, the congregation was meeting in the church, but increasingly discussing the possibility of relocating to a newer facility in a nearby town where most members now lived. Then came September 1943. The tornado came through on a Thursday afternoon, according to the September 17, 1943 editions of the Natchez Democrat. The storm system produced multiple tornadoes across the region, causing significant structural damage to rural properties along the river corridor. The church was mentioned in a brief paragraph: local church damaged by tornado, repairs underway. What that newspaper didn't describe, what no newspaper described, was what the tornado revealed. The storm struck the steeple directly. The wind didn't topple it, but it tore away sections of the exterior cladding, exposing the internal framework. And there, visible through the gaps in the damaged structure, was the sealed compartment the 1857 plans had specified. After 86 years, whatever had been hidden inside was partially exposed to daylight. The congregation responded quickly. According to church minutes from September 19, 1943, 2 days after the storm, an emergency meeting was called to assess tornado damage and determine course of action regarding campanario exposure. The minutes note that inspection of internal structure was conducted and that contents of compartment were documented. Then the record goes blank. Dr. Fairchild examined the church record book in the Methodist Historical Society archives in 2018. She photographed the pages. What she found was this: the September 19th entry ends mid-sentence. The next 8 pages that would have covered the inspection findings, The discussion of what to do and the final decision have been removed. Not torn out violently, cut out carefully with a blade. The edges are clean. Someone took their time. When the record resumes on page 87, the date is October 3, 1943. The entry reads, "Motion carried to seal campanario compartment without repair to external damage. Interior contents to remain undisturbed. Access to tower restricted indefinitely." No explanation, no description of what they found. Just a decision to seal it back up and leave it that way. Dr. Fairchild spent months trying to understand this gap in the documentation. She contacted the Methodist Historical Society, the Presbyterian Church, USA, Lost Archives, and regional historical organizations. The response was consistent. The pages were removed in 1943. Shortly after the inspection, the removal was authorized by the congregation's leadership. No copies were made. No secondary documentation exists. What you have to understand, Dr. Fairchild told me in a 2023 interview, is that this wasn't accidental. Someone made a deliberate choice to remove those pages from the official record, and they made sure no backup existed. That's not covering up a mistake, that's protecting a secret. In early 2019, Dr. Fairchild decided to visit the church property itself. It had been abandoned as an active congregation site in the 1950s after the remaining members relocated to a newer facility. The property had passed through several owners before being inherited by William Hargrave, whose great-great-grandfather had been one of the church's founding members in 1857. Hargrave lived about 40 miles from the property. When Dr. Fairchild contacted him, he was polite but cautious. He granted permission for her to photograph the exterior and conduct a limited interior examination. He was explicit about one condition: she was not to disturb the sealed campanario. She drove out on a cold morning in March. The church sat exactly where the 1857 maps indicated, on that rise above the river, surrounded now by second-growth forest. The white paint had long since weathered away. The boards were gray, some warped, some missing entirely, but the structure was sound. And the steeple, damaged in 1943 and never repaired, still rose above the tree line. From the ground she could see the gaps in the tower where the tornado had torn away the cladding. The internal framework was visible, heavy timber beams, cross-braced, built to last. And there, about 40 feet up, she could make out the sealed compartment. It appeared as a dark void in the structure, roughly 6 feet square, enclosed on all sides but visible through the weather damage. The interior of the church was what you'd expect. Pews still in place, though rotting. Hymnals scattered on the floor, pages swollen with moisture and mold. The pulpit stood at the front, leaning slightly. Light came through gaps in the roof, illuminating columns of dust. Dr. Fairchild made her way to the back of the sanctuary, where a narrow door led to the tower staircase. The stairs were intact but precarious, wooden treads that creaked and sagged under weight. She climbed carefully, testing each step. The staircase wound upward in a tight spiral, following the inner wall of the tower. At the top of the staircase, about 30 feet up, was a small platform. Above it, the sealed compartment. She could see it now from below, a wooden enclosure built into the tower frame, accessed by what appeared to be a hinged panel that had been nailed shut. Around the edges of the panel she could see where someone had applied additional boards, secured with more nails. This was the post-1943 ceiling, crude but effective. But through the gaps in the exterior cladding, the damage the tornado had caused, light came through, and in that light she could see shapes inside the compartment. She took photographs. She made sketches. What she observed, she later documented in her research notes. Compartment contains multiple objects. Visibility is limited by the ceiling boards and the angle of observation, but shapes are discernible. Objects appear to be stacked or arranged deliberately, not randomly discarded. Materials visible include what appears to be paper or parchment, several bundles, possibly tied or bound. Also visible, what may be wooden boxes or containers, rectangular, approximately 12–18 inches in dimension. One object appears metallic, possibly a container or case. Definitive identification is impossible without direct access. She spent 3 hours in that tower, photographing from every angle the limited space allowed, documenting what she could see through the gaps. Then she descended, locked the church behind her, and drove to William Hargrave's house. The conversation, as Dr. Fairchild recounted it in her notes, began cordially. She showed him the photographs. She explained what she'd observed. She asked him directly, "Do you know what's inside that compartment?" Hargrave's response was careful. "I don't know," he said. "Not for certain." "But your family has knowledge of it," Dr. Fairchild pressed. Hargrave was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My grandfather told me some things before he died. He said the church had sealed something up there after the tornado. He said it was family business. He said there were letters." "Letters from whom?" "He didn't say, or he wouldn't say. But he made it clear, very clear, that the family had decided it should stay sealed, for privacy, for reputation." Dr. Fairchild asked if she could access the compartment to document its contents properly. Hargrave declined. She asked if he would consider having the contents professionally archived. He declined. She asked if he knew what specific concerns about reputation his grandfather had meant. Hargrave stood up. The conversation was ending. "There are things in there," he said, "that the family doesn't want known. Things that might cause problems if they came out. My grandfather respected that decision. His father respected it, and I'm going to respect it too." "Even 80 years later?" Dr. Fairchild asked. "Especially 80 years later," Hargrave said, "because if it mattered enough to seal it then, it matters enough to keep sealed now." Dr. Fairchild left. She spent the next year compiling her research, cross-referencing the church records with Civil War military documentation, searching for any mention of what might have been stored at the church during the war. She found references in quartermaster records to supplies cached at river locations, mentions in regimental histories of documents stored for safekeeping, vague notations in medical reports about valuables secured at hospital facilities, but nothing specific, nothing that definitively connected to the church. She published her findings in the Journal of Southern Religious History in late 2019. The article was titled "Architectural Mystery at the Mississippi River Church, the Hidden Campanario of 1857 and the 1943 Tornado." It documented everything she'd found: the unusual construction plans, the Civil War military use, the tornado damage, the sealed compartment, the missing church record pages, the partially visible contents, and William Hargrave's limited disclosure about family knowledge. The article generated regional interest. Local newspapers ran stories. History enthusiasts shared it on social media. Other researchers contacted Dr. Fairchild asking for more details, suggesting theories about what might be hidden. And then William Hargrave called her. He asked her, politely but firmly, to stop investigating. He said the attention was unwelcome. He said his family preferred the matter remain private. He said he would not grant any further access to the property to anyone for any purpose. The campanario would remain sealed. Dr. Fairchild honored his request. She declined follow-up interviews. She removed detailed research materials from public-facing archives. Her published article remained available, but she made it clear the investigation was over. The church still stands. The campanario still contains whatever was placed inside it, whether in 1857 during the Civil War or sometime after. The compartment remains sealed. William Hargrave has made his position clear. It will stay that way as long as he owns the property. 81 years. That's how long it's been since the tornado accidentally revealed what had been hidden for 86 years before that. 167 years of deliberate concealment, interrupted by one afternoon of wind, then restored. So what can we actually know? We know the church was built in 1857 with a sealed compartment in the steeple. The architectural plans document this. The purpose isn't stated, but the compartment was intentional, designed from the beginning. We know the church served military functions during the Civil War: supply depot, hospital, strategic position. This is documented in quartermaster records, medical reports, and regimental histories housed in the National Archives. We know the congregation invested in campanario reinforcement in the 1890s and conducted maintenance of sealed compartment in the early 1900s. Church records document these activities but don't explain why. We know a tornado damaged the steeple in September 1943, exposing the sealed compartment after 86 years. This is documented in the Natchez Democrat and Church Minutes. We know the congregation inspected the compartment contents and documented their findings. Then someone removed those documentation pages from the church record book. The removal was deliberate, authorized, and complete. We know the congregation voted to seal the compartment again without repairing the external damage. They restricted access indefinitely. This decision is documented in the October 1943 church minutes. We know William Hargrave's grandfather told him the compartment contained letters and that the family had decided to maintain the sealing for privacy and for reputation. This is Hargrave's testimony to Dr. Fairchild in 2019. We know Dr. Fairchild observed objects inside the compartment through gaps in the damaged steeple, shapes suggesting paper documents, wooden boxes, possibly a metal container. She photographed these shapes but could not identify them definitively. We know Hargrave explicitly prohibits any future investigation. The campanario will remain sealed indefinitely under his ownership. What we don't know, what the available evidence cannot definitively establish, is what those objects are, why they required concealment, and why that concealment must continue. But we can consider interpretations. First interpretation: Civil War military documents. The church's strategic position and documented military use make it plausible that sensitive documents, orders, dispatches, reports, were stored there during the war. If those documents contained information embarrassing to local families or military units, documented misconduct, questionable orders, evidence of activities the families involved preferred to forget, the decision to maintain concealment for 167 years starts to make sense. The problem: military records were typically preserved in official archives. Why would documents significant enough to hide for a century and a half remain undiscovered elsewhere? Second interpretation: family correspondence. Hargrave's reference to letters supports this directly. If the compartment contains private letters from the Civil War era, correspondence revealing family secrets, relationships, financial dealings, moral compromises, the emphasis on privacy and reputation becomes more comprehensible. Personal letters can contain truths that families decide their descendants shouldn't face. The problem: why seal personal letters in a church steeple rather than destroy them, unless the letters themselves had religious or moral significance that made destruction feel wrong? Third interpretation: documentation of controversial activities. The Civil War created situations where ordinary people made choices they later regretted. If the compartment contains evidence of such choices, collaboration, profiteering, treatment of prisoners, participation in actions that violated the community's stated values, the determination to keep it sealed makes emotional sense. People protect their ancestors' reputations. They protect the community's historical narrative. The problem: after 167 years, most people whose reputations might be damaged are long dead. Why maintain secrecy now? Fourth interpretation: valuable artifacts with problematic provenance. If the compartment contains objects of monetary or historical value, currency, jewelry, military equipment, whose origin can't be legitimately explained, the family's reluctance to expose them becomes legally comprehensible. Exposure might trigger claims, disputes, questions about how the items were acquired. The problem, Dr. Fairchild's observations suggest paper documents more than precious metals, though documents themselves can be valuable. Fifth interpretation, something we haven't considered. The evidence might point toward something entirely outside these categories, something specific to this church, this congregation, these families, this particular stretch of the Mississippi River in 1857 or 1863 or 1943. The problem with this interpretation is that it's unfalsifiable. We can't evaluate what we can't imagine. All 5 interpretations fit the available evidence. None can be proven from the available evidence. The gaps in the record, the removed pages, the undocumented design purpose, the family's careful silence create space for all of them simultaneously. What we're left with is this. Something matters enough to the Hargrave family that they've maintained a 167-year silence about it. The original decision to conceal was made before the Civil War. The decision to maintain that concealment has been reaffirmed across 6 generations. And the current custodian of that decision has made clear it will not end with him. I keep thinking about the afternoon in September 1943 when the wind tore into that steeple. Imagine being one of the congregation members who climbed up into the tower afterward. You're expecting to assess storm damage, missing boards, maybe structural compromise. Instead, you find yourself looking at something your great-grandparents sealed before you were born. Something that was never meant to be seen again. You look inside, you see whatever's there, and then you have to decide, do we document this? Do we reveal it? Or do we close it back up and pretend the wind never showed us? They documented it, that much we know. Someone wrote down what they found. They recorded it in the official church record book following the established protocol for important congregational matters. Then someone, maybe the same person, maybe someone else, carefully removed those pages, cut them out, made sure no copy existed anywhere else. That's not panic. That's not a spur-of-the-moment decision to hide something shameful. That's methodical protection of a secret someone decided was worth protecting. The architectural plans from 1857 show the compartment was designed into the steeple from the beginning. This wasn't a later addition. Someone in 1857, probably multiple people given that church building was a communal effort, knew that steeple would contain a hidden space. They built it that way on purpose, which raises the question, was the compartment built to hide something that already existed in 1857, or was it built in anticipation of needing to hide something later? We can't know. The design plans don't say. But either way, the decision to create a sealed compartment in a church steeple required forethought. It required agreement among multiple people. It required construction skills and resources. It required shared understanding that some things need to be preserved but not revealed. The Civil War would have intensified that need. Armies moving through, occupation, strategic value of the river position, all of it would have made the church a natural location for storing important items, documents, valuables, things people needed to protect from looting or confiscation. And when the war ended, some of those things might have become more dangerous to reveal than to keep hidden. Dangerous to whom? That's the question William Hargrave won't answer. His grandfather told him the compartment contained letters. Letters about what? From whom? To whom? Letters significant enough that 3 generations later, their contents still threaten family reputation. In 1943, the congregation could have opened that compartment, examined the contents, and made them public. The tornado had already done the hard part. It exposed what had been hidden. All they had to do was look and tell. They looked. Then they sealed it again. Then they removed the record of what they'd seen. Then they walked away. That decision, to restore the concealment rather than end it, suggests that whatever's in there, it still mattered in 1943. It mattered enough that people who'd lived through the Depression, who were living through World War II, who had every reason to focus on present concerns rather than Civil War-era secrets, those people decided the secret was still worth keeping. And here we are, 81 years later. The people who made that decision are dead. The people they were protecting are dead. The Civil War ended 160 years ago. The children of the people who might have been embarrassed are dead. But William Hargrave says, no, the secret holds. I want to be clear about something. I don't think this is conspiracy. I don't think this is cover-up in the way we usually use that word. This is something quieter and stranger. This is a family and a community deciding that some knowledge doesn't need to be shared, that some truths can remain private, that the past, once sealed, should stay sealed. We live in a moment that believes everything should be known, that transparency is always good, that secrets are always suspicious, that the answer to mystery is investigation and exposure. But there's another way of thinking about the past, a way that says some things were decided by people who had reasons we don't fully understand, and maybe we should respect those decisions even if we don't agree with them. I'm not saying I accept that position. I'm saying it's the position the Hargrave family holds, and they have the legal right to maintain it. Dr. Ellen Fairchild's research established that something is inside that compartment. Her photographs show shapes, bundles of paper, boxes, possibly a metal container. Those objects have been there for at least 167 years. They will likely remain there for as long as the church structure stands, and the Hargrave family maintains ownership, which means this story doesn't have an ending. It has a status, sealed, indefinitely. The church still stands on that rise above the Mississippi River. The steeple is still damaged. The compartment is still visible through the gaps in the cladding if you know where to look. But you can't access it. You can't examine it. You can't know what's inside. William Hargrave is 63 years old. At some point he'll pass the property to the next generation if there is one. Maybe that person will feel differently about the sealing. Maybe they'll decide transparency outweighs privacy. Maybe they'll open the compartment, document what's inside, and give historians the answers we're looking for. Or maybe they'll honor the decision their great-great-great-great-grandparents made in 1857, and their great-grandparents reaffirmed in 1943. Maybe they'll decide that some silences are worth maintaining, that some knowledge can remain private, that not every mystery demands a solution. I don't know which way it will go. What I do know is this. In a church steeple on the Mississippi River, there are objects that have been deliberately hidden for 167 years. Multiple generations have chosen to protect that concealment. The current custodian has explicitly stated it will remain sealed for as long as he has authority over it. And the only people who know what's inside, the only living people, have decided you don't need to. Before I go, I want to ask you something. What do you do with a story like this? A story where the mystery is real, where the evidence is documented, but where the answer is being actively withheld by people with the legal right to withhold it. Does that make you more curious, more frustrated, or do you find yourself respecting the decision to keep it sealed? I'm genuinely curious where you land on this. Drop it in the comments. If you're new here, this is what we do. We look at pieces of American history that don't resolve neatly. Stories where the questions are clear but the answers remain elusive. Sometimes because the evidence is gone. Sometimes because the evidence is still there, but someone has decided we don't get to see it. The world is full of sealed compartments. Some of them are physical, steeples with hidden chambers, archives with restricted sections, documents that remain classified long after the people they protect are dead. Some of them are psychological, family stories that stop mid-sentence, questions that relatives won't answer, silences that persist across generations. This church is both. The physical compartment and the family silence reinforce each other. The objects inside remain hidden. The knowledge of what they are remains restricted. And the decision to maintain that restriction has been affirmed over and over for 167 years. That's not a failure of history. That's history functioning exactly as some people believe it should, as a selective record, shaped by choices about what to preserve and what to conceal. Whether you agree with those choices is a different question entirely. Stay curious, take care of yourself, and remember, not every story ends with answers. Some of them end with a door deliberately closed that no one with the key intends to open.